So thank you so much for being here. So I will conclude the large talks by speaking a little bit about what is our vision for SInnoPSis, what we plan to do, why SInnoPSis is useful for helping you guys collaborate with people interested in the topic of meta research, why we have maybe something to offer to you in terms of not only research collaborations, but also possible development of teaching material and other forms of contributing to discussion within University of Cyprus. So this talk will be a little bit less scientific than the previous ones. I will, however, spend a little bit of time. So it seems that we have some economists here, some non-economists. I will spend some time about one of the major ideas behind why we need a meta research center in general, a new meta research center. It seems that there are a few already. So what is special about SInnoPSis and about the way that our team has been created? Okay, so I want to share with you a little bit our main idea behind a large part of our research agenda. And maybe I draw some of you with me, some economists, into realizing that economic methods can be useful to be applied to a very relevant problem, which is how do we understand and improve science? And maybe convince non-economists who think that who are interested already in meta research to be interested in economic methods as a useful tool to address these methods. And in the end, it is the interaction between the two, at least for our point of departure as economists, that we find fruitful. So this, what I mentioned before, it will be the why. Again, it seems that with Fabio we have some common way of thinking. And then, after I explain a little bit this idea about the vision, the more practical aspects will come. Talk to you a little bit about what you should be expecting from SInnoPSis, who are we, and how, potentially there can be scientific value generated from our interaction. And then in the end, we're gonna talk about a small grant scheme that we have as part of SInnoPSis that is addressed to non-economists who might be interested in collaborating with us as a small incentive to improve this kind of cross-fertilization, and you might find this interesting. So again, let me go a little bit to the background. What is the point of all that? I guess this is well known, covered a little bit to a degree by our previous SInnoPSis scholars. It seems that we know by now quite a bit about the fact that knowledge production processes are not necessarily optimal, that there is scope for research to try to improve them, okay, but also to continue to examine in which scientific domains they are working well and in which they are not. So different opportunities, both empirically and theoretically. So the key idea for interdisciplinary collaboration, it is a problem that affects science as a whole. So all of us, even if someone is a researcher who hasn't thought about meta research, you have certainly gossip about this a little bit, about what is going on with the publication process. Have you heard about these results that they have not been replicated? Thinking about your own research, how are my incentives like this? I somehow feel that they might not be aligned with what I was envisioning. So meta research brings an opportunity for different researchers interested in the problem to come together and maybe apply tools that they already know to deal with the problem. One of the prototypical research centers, interdisciplinary research centers to deal with the problem was the Meta Research Innovation Center at Stanford. And Metrics, which is this Meta Research Center, has also been trying to generate centers, analogous centers in Europe, in particular in Berlin. But also in the last few years, we have seen other types of meta research groups and centers throughout Europe, also in the US. As Fabio mentioned, this is a relatively old center in social science and with a lot of economic input in Berkeley under Ed Miguel. And you have different sorts of hybrid systems, working groups, software tools, along with some sort of consulting consortia. This is a very large consortium in Germany, consisting of dozens of researchers across different disciplines. So these just give you a flavor, a little bit of what has happened in the last few years, as a result of meta research. So now the question is, why a new meta research center? Why? So this is going to be a little bit of sharing why we need a meta research center. Why should it have economists in it? Okay, why do we believe that economists have been an underrepresented group in meta research? Of course, not underrepresented from the perspective that we look at the ratio and we say somehow the ratio is small, but because we think that in substance there are interesting insights and methods from economics that have been underutilized. Okay, why? We believe that the problem of changing science for the better is essentially an economic problem, or it can be dealt with economic tools. It's a problem of incentives. So many times in the decades that we have been dealing with meta research, we see about incentives, but oftentimes it just becomes a word or a construct that might not be accompanied by a proper methodology to study incentives. Okay, there might be differences in approach too. So I already acknowledge that what I'm going to say, some psychologists, some political scientists might say, okay, that's an interesting method, but we think that you should be following a different approach. Some of those, there might be overlap, okay, with other sciences, and this is true. So there are possibilities for different types of methods, as long as they are sound, to contribute. Okay, so how do we have the tools to study a formidable problem? Changing incentives in an environment with interaction among agents, potentially even thousands of agents working with each other. Okay, so let's break down the problem a little bit into what concepts can we have and how we can understand about these problems. Again, I'm referring, this was mentioned briefly by Fabio. These ideas have been described in our past work with Thomas Gall and John Ioannidis in blood medicine. But we're thinking of it very simply like this. So economic theory does model interaction among many agents, and oftentimes heterogeneous agents with heterogeneous beliefs too. So all of these can be relevant when you think about changing incentives in a real life complex environment. Okay, so you can think about game theory approach, welfare economics. Again, for non-economists, those can be useful concepts to maybe look up and then speak with us. So you would be surprised, and I want to emphasize this, so if you want, we can talk more about this. How many times I've heard from people interested in meta research, thinking about the replicability of results, who are from biomedicine, how many times they spoke about, we find economics useful because of cost-benefit analysis. You speak, you have a tool to speak in concrete terms about the cost and benefits of a particular intervention. Okay, this cost-benefit analysis is a part of what is called applied welfare economics. It makes sometimes strong assumptions, but it provides a concrete tool to compare the costs and benefits of different interventions. So this is an area that we feel that we would like to be, a possible focus of SInnoPSis in the future. It's a little bit on the applied side, but it's nevertheless very useful. So all these tools, will be familiar to economists in the audience, obviously, but still, those might be interesting ideas for application of economic methods. To non-economists, you might recognize, concepts such as mechanism design, which is basically the application of applied mathematics, game theory, to simulate a change in a particular institution. What would be the effects of changing particular institutions, and in particular, are there some principles to think about optimal institutions? How would you do that? You have a mathematical model, and you have individuals who respond to incentives. Okay, so it's a potential tool, a potential language. Not perfect, but oftentimes it is the way that we know to assess certain problems. And we know in the last few years, increasingly these mathematical tools can also be used to inform the rigorous design of experiments. So oftentimes these changes can be done as part of, they can be assessed by rigorous experimental work. We have work in progress under which we are collaborating with this university. We hope that things work out, and we will have an experiment to assess certain processes of the university and whether they are optimal. Okay, so economic theory can be used to guide those field experiments. What kind of variables do you need to gather during your experiment? What kind of research hypothesis are you going to have on the basis of theory, and so on and so forth? Okay, so this is a little bit ideas about the contribution of one side of the of the coin. Okay, so I would love in the discussion, many of you who are not economists, to come up and say, this is just not enough because we have this approach and that approach and that approach, and maybe this and this and this is better than what you suggested about economics. At some degree, I think this is possible. Okay, the last thing I'm doing here is arguing that economics is the solution to the problem of meta research. It's just, in my opinion, an area that provides useful tools that have been underutilized in meta research, and this is what we are thinking of doing as part of what we do. Okay, and then certain other concepts from economics. Let me not bore you too much with this. I prefer discussion instead of just passive presentation. Concepts of public good. We can think of replicability. Producing replicable results, putting in the effort to document your work. Okay, to be registered as a type of a public good. And then what do we know about public goods? What do we know about structures of interactions with public goods that let people cooperate and contribute to them? Can we get insights from there? Can we do new experiments with researchers maybe and learn about this? Okay, what is the optimal intervention? Can the theory of public goods help us? We know things such as the difference between direct regulation and performance-based incentives. Here's an idea for the meta researchers, among us who have an idea of the initiatives for reproducibility, and for Adrian especially. So oftentimes we know that there has been huge progress by standardization, huge progress by common standards, huge progress by tying our hands to report specific things. That would capture what we as economists would call direct regulation. Somebody comes and they tell you exactly how to do things in order to make sure that we don't have deviation of behavior to undesirable degree. But there's an alternative to that, what we would call performance-based incentives, which would mean we're not going to tell you exactly how to do things, but we're going to measure your outcomes. That's the challenge, of course. We're going to measure your outcomes in the end, and we're going to incentivize you on the basis of the outcome. So it leaves to you the leeway to decide how to achieve the outcome. So this is that would seem like a challenge. It would need, it's kind of of course a new and grand idea, but it would be if we improve our measurement of reproducibility, then maybe we can turn the tables a little bit in the direction of incentivizing outcomes in terms of reproducible results, rather than telling others exactly how to achieve reproducibility. Why? Last thing I want to pass on this now. Why bother with that instead of just using templates? Because we economists know that oftentimes people may innovate and find ways to improve things that are not taught by the regulator or by somebody who is providing a template. So these are just some ways that economic thinking can help us potentially. So, and of course, we're interested in the question of property rights, intellectual property in this, documentation of scientific outcomes, sharing research results. What happens when you have private firms? There have been some discussion and some, difficulties and scandals about how private corporations were claiming research outcomes that were proven to be false. How much could the meta-research movement have helped in that direction? Could we have requested them to do some sort of data sharing such that other researchers at least partly confirm? I'm referring, if you wish, to the famous Theranos case, okay, where you have a private corporation, but of course it's it's for profit, and they claim essentially, and if you wish, they manipulate their market value by claiming that they can do scientifically things that they cannot. So there, how do you achieve appropriate, transparency when you have private data? Okay, so economics of intellectual property and monopolies is a branch of economics that could be potentially useful. Okay, let me say an interesting statement from a recent Nobel Prize winning in economics in terms of field experiments. So that fits with part of what we said, but I think it's interesting and relevant. So what the economist brings to the table, in addition to evaluation expertise, is prior evidence of theories that help them to predict what should work and how and what should not. The evaluation of the program then serves to test these theories. So randomized evaluations, in effect, are becoming field experiments. So on top of seeing what evaluation works, we are using the experiment as a test of a theory to understand a little bit more deeply how things work. So apologies if I have spoken too much a little bit about what economics has to do with all that, but it is an important part of SInnoPSis, and many of you might be wondering why there is so much focus. So this is the most important slide. This is what I want really to talk about, so that we take out of it. What are we here for? What is the mission of SInnoPSis? So we're starting at the Meta Research Center with our own researchers who live in Cyprus. They're going to be interacting with us. You have the opportunity to meet them right after. So I have asked them to self-represent themselves here really briefly with a slide, So you will know that there are people interested with research education, with research interest, and with time in their hands as junior researchers, and intellectual curiosity on meta-research topics, okay, to produce together with UC scholars to produce research, education, and other outcomes that I will talk about now. Okay, and of course, the point of today's meeting pertains to a second pillar of what SInnoPSis is about, which is to bring together University of Cyprus scholars interested in the study of science and innovation, especially from the meta research perspective, and brainstorm, produce research, produce educational material together, okay? And this will be attained at the medium term with events such as this. And then, of course, you know, we're going to give you information about where we're going to be located, and hopefully this interaction will continue. Okay, in the end, the idea is to produce interesting research collaboration and, of course, naturally, educational material on reproducibility, meta research, open science. Okay, so you're already, you know, familiar with much of what Adrian is doing, if you wish, who is a little bit more mature in terms of, you know, this kind of material. Okay, so we will be starting and sharing with the University of Cyprus community approaches, videos, material, methodologies to help document, disseminate outcomes and relevant help for people interested in, for colleagues interested in open science. Okay, hopefully those will be able to produce research publications, but also potentially further funding to enhance our team, to make you know, our team stronger, and maybe go towards, you know, more different and more enhanced approaches. So this is a starting point for us. And of course, in the end, why does society bother to fund us, and why are we all here? In order to be able to say something relevant about policy. Okay, so in the end, we will be encapsulating the lessons that we will be learning from our own research. Of course, the meta research and the meta-analysis of prior evidence. All of this will be relevant evidence for policy advice. And I would like to emphasize here that especially the newest part of what we're doing with the topic of scalability, we believe is going to be of very high interest to policymakers. The way we see it is as follows. There are two necessary components for scientific results stemming from empirical research to be useful for the policymaker, for society. One pylon, if you wish, is the result to be true, to be replicable, to be reproducible. But this is not enough. There is a second thing that is now more under, you know, active research, which is, even if the result is true, how possible is it to reproduce it with a similar effect size in large scale as a policy? So we don't have time to talk about that, but overwhelming evidence increasingly has shown that when results are translated into policy, invariably the effect size falls for several reasons. And this is such an interesting topic for further research, to understand why this is happening and how we can convince policymakers that scientists are on top of the problem. We study carefully, we try to understand what is the problem. Is it the problem about how the policy is exactly implemented? Is it the problem about the group of people to which the policy is applied? That might be very different from the original research. Could it be some kind of particular bias in the previous literature? So we go a little bit. So when a result is different, it's scaled up as policy. You know, again, it can be the problem of the result not having been correct in the first place, the problem of reproducibility. So different possibilities. But the important thing is the theoretical framework and the rigorous approach in thinking about these problems. Okay, so we have active research in this domain. Any questions? Okay, and our long-run vision is along the same lines to serve as a permanent research center, potentially teaming up with analogous research centers in Europe in a network, okay, and produce, as we learn more and we understand more, like capable advice about evidence-based policy, and potentially also do this helping educational interventions about evidence-based. So develop or at least help about programs and about methodologies of how to interpret scientific evidence. So that would be very valuable for policymakers in terms of, employing the people who can help them inform correct policy choices. Okay. And this is just one concrete point that I'm using, and I would like to conclude. We want to give a little bit of emphasis in the long run. I hinted about an experiment that we are doing in progress with the university. We are interested about the optimal ways of funding practices. Okay, as researchers, again, this is part that we gossip a lot, but we don't think scientifically a lot. Do we really have to do that many pages of grant application? Do I really need to spend most of my time doing this? Is the optimal way of allocating funding the ones that we see now? Of course, there are already changes. Okay, so of course we're not the first who are proposing this. Okay, but what is lacking is rigorous evaluation of alternative schemes. Okay, so that could be something that we might play in an important role in the long run. Okay, so this is the last thing I'm going to say. So in incentivizing colleagues, and normally this should have been advertised in our community, but maybe didn't attract enough attention. It wasn't salient enough, so we will again send reminders about this. We have a small grant scheme. So from our funding, we will allocate, using a competitive grant, an amount up to 15,000 euros, okay, to support the research of scholars who are interested to collaborate with us. And those scholars should be outside economics. We are economists, so we want to incentivize interdisciplinary collaboration. Okay, and this will be a relatively light application scheme. It would be a 5-page proposal with 1 page of budget and CVs of up to 2 investigators, 1 or 2 pages each. And then, this is interesting, we are proposing already. So we are proposing already some research areas that fall within the scope of what we are interested in. So any of you outside economics who are interested in, developing methods in meta-analysis and bias in social science research, who are interested in developing surveys to examine, to measure important variables about meta-research issues, about the behavior of researchers, the behavior of editors, the behavior of funders. There's much more scope in doing this, especially, we would call for the help of psychology colleagues who are, who have the measurement tools to help us with this. The modeling and experimental science of incentives and behavior. Okay, so that would be more in the applied mathematics and experiments approach. Okay, but there would be disciplines outside economics who would help and provide with these tools. Maybe philosophical underpinnings of reproducibility, deeper theoretical work from the sense of philosophy. So, we have a relatively broad approach. And then it could be a more concrete idea about addressing how specific reforms might affect reproducibility. So I'm not, do I constrain myself well? Am I spending excessive time? I think this is the last slide. So I will, of course, remind you all about this. So details will be provided. There will be enough time, I hope. And the application deadline for the small grant scheme will be 15 of November. Okay, and interviews will take place in December. Okay, so this was the last slide. Thank you so much, everyone. And sorry, what is the time? So I think there is some time for some discussion, some comment, some brainstorming.